That's his term. But before I get to the metaphor, I briefly want to say something about the need for the metaphor. The word Christianity itself actually has a very short history. It was only in the 18th century that people began to widely use the term and to talk of Christianity as if it were a thing, as a discrete entity that could be described or defined somehow. That thinking was very much a feature of that period of history, which we now refer to as the Enlightenment, or some call the Age of Reason. Different name, same thing, more or less. Up until that point, people spoke of Christendom, meaning the world of the Christians. So the idea of just separating and looking, dispassionately at Christianity as a religion was quite a revolutionary idea in its time. In the Enlightenment there came a new awareness that much of Western history had been shaped by Christian thought. As this awareness grew, so did the idea that Christianity only offered a single perspective on things, and that there were, indeed, other ways of understanding the world. In seeking to understand the influence Christianity had upon Western culture, scholars began to define Christianity in relation to doctrines, stories, concepts, and ideas. And so they took all of that bundle and labelled it Christianity. Since that time, scholars have used exactly the same process to define other religions. They ask questions of other religions such as, what are your religious texts? Or what is your message of salvation? There's a big assumption in that particular question. Do they even have a message of salvation? But, these questions were shaped by Western ideas. And also things like, what are your rituals and what are those sorts of practices associated? Sadly, to this day, there are still some who learn, lots of people still learn about religions in that particular way. Textbooks on religion will tell you, here are the essential features of being a Buddhist, or here are the essential aspects of being a Hindu or of being a Muslim, or you name it. These books provide you with a sort of checklist of those essential features. So what are the things? You tick the boxes and therefore you have it, right? The religion is all nicely squared away into a neat little package. Unfortunately, these caricatures of religion can be extremely misleading and often really inaccurate in terms of what's actually happening within people's religious life, typically because they fail to account for the vast diversity found within each religion. Don't you hate it when people tell you what you believe? I don't think I'm alone in that. I hate it when people tell me, because I'm a Christian, I must think this. But it happens all the time. So I can certainly think of those occasions where people have blindly assumed that because I'm ordained, therefore I must sign up to this aspect of Christianity. Otherwise, of course, I couldn't be a Christian. I run into that all the time. I recently had someone approach me about a comment our good friend Glyn made in an interview in relation to the concept of heaven. And Glyn, simply in response to that question of, what do you think about an afterlife, Glyn just said, look, I don't know. I don't know. I thought that was a pretty reasonable response. My response would actually be very similar. But I then got bailed up by this person, demanding to know how Glyn could say such a thing, because it's the job of Christians to give reassurance to people about, what happens when we die. Christians, we're supposed to know the answers. And that was a very real thing. People think, you're a Christian, therefore you have to know, or you at least have to believe in this. So this idea that actually some Christians might still have some questions about those things was, it was pretty fruitless in that discussion, I'll be honest. So anyway, thanks, Glenn. On a much larger scale, this was what Lloyd Gearing brushed up against in the 60s when he suggested, and the particular bone of contention that wound people up, was that he suggested that the resurrection may not have actually involved the resuscitation of a body, that the experience might have been broader or maybe more spiritual than that. For some, that idea just didn't fit with that textbook understanding of what Christianity was. Their response was to say, Gearing has broken the rules, therefore, see you later, he has to go. The challenge to anyone studying religion today is to accept that no religion can actually be boiled down to a checklist of the essential elements. While we can appreciate, for example, that there are three major forms of Buddhism, just to give an example, we still realise that actually within those three major forms there is this huge variety of practice and belief, and in fact suddenly we find it all gets a bit amorphous because people in category 1 believe certain things and the people in category 3 aren't supposed to share those beliefs, but actually they do, because there's been all this cross-pollination of belief that's happened through the centuries. Our Western minds really don't like that. Because part of our cultural inheritance is the idea that if we simply learn enough about something, eventually we'll be able to completely understand it. It's a little bit egotistical of Western thinkers, but we really, at the guts, we think, no, if we just keep learning enough, eventually the complete picture will emerge and there you go, we'll have it. And that idea persists in all sorts of ways. Many of you will have heard, and this is an example of that, okay? Many of you will have heard about the concept of an ecosystem. Okay? In fact, with I think lots of the concerns of our time in terms of the environment, this is a word that gets bandied around a lot, talking about what an ecosystem is, but its history is a little bit sketchy, actually. In the science of ecology, there was, at the time this idea first started getting spoken about, this idea of a system where things all interrelate and analysing what that system was, there was a really influential idea which was called, given a very grandiose name, the universal law of equilibrium. The universal law of equilibrium. This idea is that if nature is left to its own devices, it will reach a state where all things are in balance. Some of you will have heard that idea. It creeps through in various ways, particularly in terms of there's an idea that comes up from time to time, certainly I've run into it, where everything would be in balance were it not for humans. We're the ones who are out of balance. We're the ones mucking up the environment. Now, I don't disagree that humans have had a really negative impact on our environment. We have. There's no doubt that we're exhausting resources at an unsustainable rate. What I do contend with is the implied cause and effect argument. Things are wrong with nature, therefore we're to blame. We've got some of the blame, but not necessarily all of the blame. The idea that nature would be fine if humans were just not part of the equation is not really that clear-cut at all. Ecologists once believed, just like there's very Western thought once again, that if enough data could be gathered from within an ecosystem, we could see that the natural state of any ecosystem was equilibrium, that it would find this perfect natural balance. I'm going to show you a clip of what actually happened. Dynamic and unpredictable change. Well, what a surprise, really, but, we think about it, it makes a great deal of sense, really. Within the study of Christianity, and within Christianity itself, some assume that religion is a static, stable system of belief, and therefore, given enough study, it could be fully understood. When laid out in those terms, we begin to see the flaw in that assumption. Religion is, just like nature, a dynamic and unpredictable sphere of human activity. I'd suggest that any attempt to try and fully define a religion is as futile as the experiments in ecology that were trying to demonstrate the stability of nature.